US to boost weapon shipments to Ukraine. Trump told Zelenskyy aid pause was not his decision, and how Europe preparing toughest sanctions against Russia in 3 years. We'll talk about this with political analyst, European Leadership Network UK member, Alexandra Filippenko. Alexandra, glad to see you, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Alexandra, the US will provide Ukraine with defensive weapons as part of military aid, states US President Donald Trump during a meeting with Israel Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. He stated, we're going to send some more weapons. They have to be able to defend themselves. They are getting hit very hard now. We are going to have to send more weapons, defensive weapons primarily. What are the underlying motivations behind President Trump's sudden decision to authorize more defensive weapons for Ukraine?
Well, first of all, Donald Trump has been saying for some time now that his main aim is for people to stop dying. He's always been repeating this mantra that shooting must end. So for Donald Trump, this idea that Kyiv must be able to defend itself against severe blows, severe attacks by Russia is self-evident. And Donald Trump has been repeating that, yes, we are continuing to support Ukraine, we are continuing, but we've seen that the Pentagon stopped some weapons, stopped even those weapons that are right at the border with Ukraine, right in Poland. And even though those weapons, I must stress that those weapons were not part of US weapons that were supposed to be used for American troops, and they were never planned to be used by American troops or American army in general. These were weapons from the very beginning that were planned to be transferred to Ukraine or any other American ally to this matter. So for Pentagon, this was not part of their weaponry from the very beginning. It was not part of Pentagon stockpile, of American army stockpile. No, it's been confirmed that these weapons that were supposed to go to Ukraine, or part of those weapons that were supposed to go to Ukraine that were frozen, were not part of American weaponry to begin with. So this was very strange that Pete Hegseth, that the Minister of Defense, decided to freeze weapons. And that is why we've been hearing from the White House, from State Department, from everyone that no, we are continuing helping Ukraine. We continue our sending weapons to Ukraine. We continue. And so now we see that most probably this freeze, this stop, this pause was due to the fact that the Pentagon and Pentagon chiefs and Pete Hegseth himself just didn't want to look into details. He just decided, oh, let's stop it all. Stop it all for a few days. Just stop it all. And let's review. They didn't want to, let's say, go into those details that those weapons were from the very beginning not part of American stocks. No, okay, let's stop everything. And then we'll see, and then we'll decide. So right now, after the words of President Trump, the Pentagon confirmed that with President's instructions, they will send additional defensive weapons to Ukraine. What does this mean, defensive? We don't know what exactly do they mean by defensive. So these are the weapons that were supposed to go to Ukraine, and that is why everyone was so sure that there will be no problem with weapons up until New Year's at least, and maybe afterwards there will be more. But this pause, as I believe, was driven by the fact that the Pentagon just didn't want to get into those details. What is going where, how, what belongs to whom? Let's just stop everything and then we'll resume. But of course, when we're talking about war, when we're talking about severe attacks by Russia on Ukrainian cities, every day and every hour it can be critical. Every day and every hour is extremely important. And for the Pentagon, they don't see it that way. They just say, oh, well, what a pause in 2 days can do. And of course, Ukraine still has weapons, but if that pause lasted longer, that could have been a problem. That could have been a real blow to Ukrainian defense. So right now, yes, Pentagon confirms that more weapons to Ukraine, stressing that these are primary defensive weapons. They are going to be sent to Ukraine. And I believe that that pause was due to the fact that for Pentagon, it was plain easier just to stop everything than to get into details and see what goes where, how, and what actually was part of American stockpile at home to be used by the American army at home or abroad. I mean, for example, in the Middle East, for example, those American troops that are in the Middle East, 40,000 Americans who are on the Middle East. But this was never, those weapons that were frozen in Poland, they were never part of American planned stockpile to be used by the American army. And it was frozen, it was paused only because it was easier that way.
Yes, President Donald Trump has reportedly assured Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy during a phone call on the 4th of July that the suspension of U.S. aid to Ukraine was not his personal decision, reported by the Wall Street Journal. And the Wall Street Journal, citing officials familiar with the conversation between the two leaders, states that Trump denied responsibility for the delay in previously approved military aid to Ukraine. How do you think? Could President Trump's claim that the aid suspension was not his decision be seen as an attempt to distance himself from politically damaging consequences and reframe his position on Ukraine? Is this a strategic effort to rehabilitate Trump's image as a potential ally to Ukraine?
Of course, for President Trump, on the one hand, he doesn't want to be seen as someone who is not helping Ukraine, for example. Of course not, because for Americans, for American people, for those supporting President Trump, this is self-evident that the United States needs to continue helping Ukraine. Because as we've seen, as we've heard many, many times, for those voting for the Republican Party, those voting for President Trump, were the people who believed that the United States should continue supporting Ukraine. And now what we are hearing, that the interests of the White House and Washington's interests in Ukraine in general are limited. That is according to the former senior Pentagon advisor, Dan Caldwell. And in one of his interviews, he said that President Trump made a difficult but necessary decision to prioritize the safety and readiness of the U.S. military by pausing the delivery of hard-to-replace ammunition to Ukraine, where limited U.S. interests are at stake. So those limited interests, that's the way they're trying to spin it, that there are limited interests only. But for now, for President Trump, it is very important not to be seen as someone who stops help to Ukraine, who stops help to those who have been attacked by Russia. Because for Americans in general, although they're trying slowly but surely to convey to Americans that Washington's interests in Ukraine are limited. This is part of this whole new way of looking at things. But as of now, we are seeing that this work, of course, maybe it will continue for some time. But for now, it's very difficult to explain to Americans that interests in Ukraine are limited, because for Americans, those interests are helping a nation that's been attacked, helping a country who is being attacked by Russia. And of course, Americans, partially due to history, partially due to their view of the Soviet Union and looking at Russia as being the epitome of Soviet Union, Union and the continuation of the Soviet Union, partially because of that, of course. They are seeing Russia and Russian officials as a potential threat to the United States. They are not even looking into those facts that we can see on Russian propaganda channels, or even when new weapons are being presented, even, for example, by Putin, when they are making those AI images of new Russian weaponry shooting somewhere to the west coast of the United States all of a sudden, and showing how easy could it be to go not only to East Coast, but all the way to the West Coast. So this is all, they are not even seeing that, but they know that Russia is a potential threat. So when Russia, being a potential threat to the United States, to international peace and security, is attacking Ukraine, is attacking its neighbor, is attacking a sovereign country, then that means that the United States need to help out. And this idea is very deep in American minds, and we're seeing different polls. Of course, in 2022, 2023, those polls showed that 70% of Americans said that the United States need to help Ukraine and help Ukraine more and more and more. Right now, it's about 50%. It can be sometimes 45, sometimes 55. And within those half of Americans, there are like 1/3 that are saying something to the effect of, we need to help only financially. Then there's a third that is saying we need to help with weapons. And then there's a third that is saying we need to help some other way. But there is this need to be there. There's this need. They see that 50%, like half of Americans, are seeing that the United States must be there. So now, someone not even in Trump's close circle. This is a former senior Pentagon advisor, Dan Caldwell, who's been giving out interviews for past few days, talking about limited American interests in Ukraine. This is part of this push by Pentagon, by people surrounding Pete Hegseth, the head of Pentagon, to convince Americans that it's better not to help Ukraine that much. But this work that they are trying to do right now stands right by this deep, deep understanding of American citizens that the United States need to help those countries affected by, attacked by, or somehow in other way, again, affected by Russia or countries like Iran or any other country, or North Korea, for example, that can be considered as danger to the United States. So as of now, President Trump, of course, doesn't want to be seen as that person who stops help to Ukraine. No, not at all. But we see that there are groups surrounding the Pentagon, somewhere near, not in the administration, but somewhere near the administration, trying to convince Americans that Washington's interests in Ukraine are limited, are very limited. So they need to prioritize something else. So as of now, we are seeing that this suspension is stopped by the will of the President Trump, who is seen as supporting. But this work is being made, and most probably it's being made also with the help of Russian propaganda, because Russian propaganda, of course, has been working in the United States also quite powerfully. We saw all those sponsored contracts, sponsored by Russia Today, sponsored by Russian propaganda leaders, let's say. So this work is being done. But for now, as of now, what we're seeing now, according to polls, no, Americans see the need to continue helping Ukraine, and President Trump is following the Americans right now.
President Volodymyr Zelenskyy has discussed the possible replacement of the current Ukrainian ambassador to Washington, Oksana Markarova, during a phone call with US President Donald Trump. And as reported by Bloomberg, a source familiar with the matter told Bloomberg that the list of potential candidates for the post includes Prime Minister, Deputy Prime Minister, Defense Minister, and Energy Minister. Here, how critical is the role of Ukrainian's ambassador to the United States in shaping and maintaining bipartisan support for continued U.S. military and financial assistance?
Of course, the role of the ambassador is always important, and we've seen that the U.S. ambassador to Ukraine could not withstand how the Trump administration decided to comment on Russian attacks on Kyiv and other peaceful Ukrainian cities, and left her post. This was quite a blow to the State Department, and of course the personality, the role of personality is important for the White House, for the State Department. And we should also remember, during that infamous talk or meeting in the White House by President Zelenskyy, President Trump, and Vice President J.D. Vance, when President Zelenskyy was criticized not only for the way he dressed, but also for the fact that he met with Democrats prior to the election. This is what J.D. Vance, Vice President of the United States, reminded President Zelenskyy of, that during his visit to the United States while Biden was in power, President Zelenskyy met with U.S. officials in Pennsylvania, in key swing state in the American election, in October 2024, right before the election. The election, of course, was in November 2024. So President Zelenskyy met with the representatives of the Democratic Party, and he met with senators from the Democratic Party, and he met with the governor of Pennsylvania, who is a Democrat. And this meeting, according to U.S. officials, was prepared by and was made possible by the ambassador of Ukraine to the United States. So this was one of the points that President Zelenskyy was reminded of while he was in the United States, and while that infamous and that quite unpleasant, let's put it this way, meeting in the White House. So we understand that this is a very painful point. If J.D. Vance, who is already the Vice President of the United States, Donald Trump already won. Donald Trump prevailed on that election. Why remember about the things that happened before the election? Let's close that chapter and let's open the next one. No, no, no. Trump administration remembers the previous chapter. Trump administration remembers what's been said, who was praised by President Zelenskyy. They remember that President Zelenskyy met with Democrats. He didn't meet with Republicans there in Pennsylvania, in a key swing state. No, no, no. Even though they won, even though Republicans won Pennsylvania, no, they still remember about it. And they still remember who organized that meeting, who headed that meeting. It was organized by the ambassador of Ukraine, of course, as top official of Ukraine in the United States. That is, of course, that's been like that. So for right now, for President Zelenskyy, maybe this is the way to move forward with the Trump administration, to have another ambassador, although it is additionally, it can President Zelenskyy can only be praised for the fact that he didn't fall for what J.D. Vance has been basically accusing him of, and he did not replace the ambassador right there and then. He did not replace, he didn't turn his back. President Zelenskyy didn't turn his back on the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine. He didn't turn his back on the ambassador right there and then in the White House. But maybe now time has passed. Maybe now it's a way to move forward and to open a new chapter. So because of course the personality, the key that is key for the White House, is key for State Department, because the ambassador of a country is a top official of that country in the United States. And of course, when there's any issue, any question, or any press conference that needs to be held, or any consultations that are needed from that country, first of all, the White House and the State Department would reach out to the ambassador and would reach out to start the dialogue. So, of course, the personality is extremely, extremely important.
French Foreign Minister Jean-Noël Barrot has announced that the European Union, on France's initiative and in coordination with US senators, is preparing a new package of the toughest sanctions against Russia since the beginning of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Barrot said that the new package would not focus solely on the energy sector, particularly oil export revenues, but will also target financial players both within Russia and abroad. It concerns legal entities and individuals who help the Kremlin circumvent existing sanctions. He emphasized that it is precisely because of this support that Putin is able to continue waging war despite mounting international pressure. To what extent could this new sanctions package materially disrupt Russia's ability to finance its war against Ukraine? Will the sanctions significantly reduce the Kremlin's revenue from oil exports, particularly if the price cap is lowered from $60 to $45 per barrel?
Of course, economists are commenting on it widely, and I can only quote my colleagues, economists, who are saying that, of course, this cap would be a huge blow for Russian economy. Russian economy is in a tough spot right now, and it's the situation is dire. So the additional push, additional restraint for Russian economy is additional restraint for President Trump to finance war, of course. So right now, the prices are around 56, if I'm not mistaken, in proposed by Russia prices, and those prices that are foreseen in the Russian budget are around $56 per barrel, and anything lower would make things tougher for Russian economy. And although President Trump has said that President Putin is a professional in avoiding sanctions, President Trump still answered one of the questions by the journalists who asked, do you think that Putin is stalling and mocking you because he is taking a tougher stance on Ukraine and he continues to attack Ukraine? President Trump said, no, I don't think so. I think he's concerned about the sanctions. I think he's very concerned about the sanctions. And as you know, we're making decisions about this. And as you know, the Senate has proposed tough sanctions, serious sanctions. So President Trump thinks that for Putin, it's as Trump put it, Putin is not thrilled about the sanctions, but he's working around the sanctions. They're pretty tough, but he's been working around them for some time as being professional about it. He's a professional. Could more sanctions be imposed? Yes, they could be imposed. So this view of Trump that Putin is a professional in avoiding sanctions or working around sanctions. Of course, it can change if the sanctions by the European Union and generally the sanctions that are connected with the price of barrel of price of oil, they will probably remarkably affect Russian economy. They can be remarkably effective. They can really be a blow for Russian economy. But again, quoting President Trump, Putin has been working around sanctions for some time now. So maybe they will find a way. If the European Union and the United States work together, then probably it would be very risky for Russia to continue. But as of now, we've been seeing how Russia has been avoiding being that much affected by sanctions from the start of the full-scale invasion and from 2014, from the start of the war, from the beginning of the war, because of course we remember that some sanctions were imposed on Russia, even in 2014.
Alexandra, thank you so much for this interesting conversation. As always, need to say that with us today we were joined by Alexandra Filippenko, a political analyst and member of the European Leadership Network, UK. Alexandra, thank you for being with us and for your valuable thoughts. To our audience, thank you for staying with us, and see you.
Thank you. See you soon.